The president bears responsibility for Wednesday's attack on Congress.
President Trump is responsible for provoking the events of the day.
The president's language and rhetoric crossed a line, and it was reckless.
The president needs to understand that his actions were the problem, not the solution.
This is the cost of telling thousands of people that there is a legitimate shot of overturning the election.
In the year since the attack on the Capitol, the vast majority of Republicans have refused to condemn the former president or the actions that led to the uprising. The New York Times with this headline tonight: Trump's hold on the GOP is unrivaled. Quote, his rehabilitation, to the extent one was even needed among Republicans, is the latest example of an enduring lesson of his tumultuous time in politics, that Mr. Trump can outlast almost any outrage cycle, no matter how intensely it burns. The spotlight shifts, the furor fades, then he rewrites history, end quote. With us tonight, Eugene Robinson, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for The Washington Post, and Bill Kristol, author, writer, thinker, and Politico. He's a veteran of the Reagan and Bush administrations and the editor-at-large at The Bulwark. And you were also involved with the group that put this ad together. It's running on conservative networks. In fact, the target of those ads, or that ad, is not Democrats, it's Republicans. It's people who might be reminded what right looks like.
Yeah, that's right. I'm proud to be part of the group that did this ad. Barry Rubin, our video genius, put it together. I think it's very compact and crisp and makes the point. And the point is, before they could look at the polls, before they could get intimidated by the idea of primary challenges, before they can get intimidated by Donald Trump, once again, people reacted in real time to what happened. You know how it is. Something happens, you have that first reaction before you think, which is the honest reaction. And then you spend weeks, months, years sort of papering that over. The Republican Party has spent a year papering it over and distorting it. But it's important to help some people, at least. I don't think most Republicans will see it. There might be some, 5, 10, 20%, not an unimportant number for as we go forward, who say, that's right, that really was terrible. And then, secondly, why is the party denying it now? Well, the reason they're denying it now is because they're terrified of Trump. It's Trump's party. And by denying it now, they're emboldening efforts to steal elections and distort elections and foster this big lie which weakens our democracy going forward. So I hope this ad can be a tiny part, obviously, of much bigger efforts, the biggest of which I think right now, honestly, is the January 6th committee, to really bring home the truth of what happened and not let it just get memory hold.
Eugene, there are a lot of Republicans, or some Republicans, who will say, all right, it happened, it was bad, yeah, it was Trump's fault, but let's just put this behind us and move on. You wrote this week in a column that in order to save our democracy, there needs to be a reckoning about January 6th. What do you mean by that? What does a real reckoning look like?
Well, it means finding out exactly what happened, how it was planned, how it was organized, how it was funded, and how it was directed, and how it happened. And so all the work that the January 6th committee is doing has to be done. At the same time, the Justice Department has to continue its prosecutions of the insurrectionists who committed these violent acts at the Capitol, assaulted police officers, and defiled the Capitol, breaking tons of laws in the process, and has to go beyond that. As Attorney General Garland said today, he is certainly not shy of doing, look at the plotters and the planners and the inspirers to see if there are criminal charges that need to be filed on some of the higher-ups. And then there also has to be a reckoning in terms of what almost happened, this idea that Mike Pence could, peremptorily just change the electoral vote if he chose to do so. So one, I think, relatively quick and easy and important thing to do would be to reform the Electoral Count Act, which is kind of a mess, it's kind of ambiguous and unclear, and make it clear that the vice president does not have that power. So there's no question going forward.
Bill, let me ask you about Donald Trump has decided not to do his press conference or whatever it was he was going to do tomorrow, but Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene are going to present something that they call a Republican response. I'm not clear on who allows them to do that or who these Republicans are who think that's a good idea.
Well, those two do, and they're members of Congress. As you know, they can get a room or stand outside and have a press conference and make claims if they want. But, yeah, I think it's interesting that Trump backed off. And, of course, it is about Donald Trump going forward in large part. I just add that to Gene's list of why we have to come to grips with this. Donald Trump right now is leading in polls to be the Republican nominee for president. There's some chance, 30%, 50%, 60%, that the Republicans will win the next presidential election. They win some of them. They have advantages in the Electoral College. We could have a recession, God knows what. Anyway, there's a chance the Republicans could win. Trump likely to be the nominee. Very important for people to come to grips with the serious question. Should this man be president again? What are the risks of that? Liz Cheney has put that very powerfully, and Liz Cheney is someone who went along with Trump in 2016 and 2020. She wasn't crazy about it, to say the least. I don't know how she voted in the privacy of the booth, but she supported the Republican Party. But is this man? The Republicans can't take that attitude of, oh, well, you know, if he wins the nomination, I'm a Republican. I guess I just have to support him. I think one thing that really is important here is to make people come to grips with what Trump did. And that's why it's so important to establish his responsibility, which I think is clear, for inciting the thing, for trying to use the instrumentalities of the federal government, for trying to pressure state officials to overturn the election. And then the lying about it afterwards, of course, as well. And the dereliction of duty that afternoon, 187 minutes, which I think the committee is very interested in, where he knew what was happening and refused to stop it because he wanted the violence, he wanted the intimidation, he wanted the chaos.
And we're learning more and more about who told him what in those 187 minutes. These two gentlemen are staying with us. Coming up, the Attorney General put it simply today, it's now up to Congress to help ensure that every eligible voter can cast a vote that counts. What are the chances of that happening when the 11th hour continues? Minority Leader Mitch McConnell seems increasingly concerned that Democrats might actually get something done on voting rights. In a floor speech today, McConnell called efforts to connect the January 6th insurrection to attacks on democracy through voter suppression distasteful. And just yesterday, he falsely claimed that Republican state legislatures were not making it harder to vote, calling that the Democrats' big lie. Still with us, Eugene Robinson and Bill Kristol. Bill, the Minority Leader has talked about perhaps amending the 1887 Electoral Vote Count Act, the Electoral Count Act, which many people didn't know existed, but it was the thing that happens, that governs what happens on January 6th. You tweeted today that maybe he will, maybe he won't, but that's not really where our attention should be focused.
And I'm strongly for reforming it, and personally, if I had been in charge of the Democratic strategy, I would have introduced that bill as well as the other two bills and maybe moved them all, because I think in a way it's the easiest to explain to people. We had this chaos between November 3rd and January 6th that needn't have happened in terms of the state legislatures, in terms of the House of Representatives on January 6th itself, the vice president's role, and so forth. Having said that, that bill's not been introduced yet. There are two other bills which are good bills. If the Republicans want to strike parts of them, they should let them be debated on the floor and suggest amendments. And it may well be that they'll get some votes to take out the parts they just dislike the most. They have refused to let them even be debated, and that's the situation we now face with the John Lewis Act and the Freedom to Vote Act.
Eugene Robinson, we're interested in hearing what the president and the vice president have to say tomorrow about January 6th. And, of course, there's been some pressure on them both to lean into the voting rights aspect of things a little bit more. And it's something they've been somewhat resistant to do, or depending on your perspective. There are some critics who say they've been too resistant about it. What do you expect to happen, and what do you think can happen if the president decides that he's going all in on voting rights?
Well, if the president decides this is his number one issue and number one initiative, then that has a big impact in Washington. And so that's one thing he can do. I hope he and Vice President Harris do lean into the voting rights question tomorrow when they give remarks, because, we are talking about the survival of our democracy. We are talking about the basic right to vote. We are talking about these attempts across the country to restrict that right to vote in ways that favor the Republican Party, and we simply can't allow that to happen. President does have a bully pulpit, and he should put whatever pressure on he can apply.
Bill, you and your group have taken out an ad on conservative television tonight. The difference with the president is if he has this bully pulpit and he goes all in, he's still got Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin. How does he solve that problem?
Well, Manchin and Sinema support the bill. The question is, and they voted for it, the question is whether they'll support changing the filibuster in certain ways to make it possible to pass it. I think he needs to try to persuade them of that. Maybe they need to do another vote. Maybe they need to pull out individual parts of the bill. No intimidation of election officials. No partisan overruling of nonpartisan decisions by election commissions. Let's just put that on the floor. Are Republicans really going to oppose that? I mean, so I think there might be ways to begin to make it harder for Republicans to oppose this and also convince Manchin and Sinema that if the Republicans can keep on opposing, they've got to support reforms in the filibuster. They've opened that door. Manchin has at least some, but what those reforms will be is not so clear right now.
Gentlemen, thank you for your time tonight. Eugene Robinson and Bill Kristol.